Playing a game riddled with strategy like Hell Let Loose requires a couple of ingredients: communication, teamwork, and knowledge. In this map tutorial we'll take a very deep dive into Omaha Beach, explaining all the nooks and crannies and how to properly attack and defend specific points on the map. As this will end up being a very long video, up to 40 minutes or maybe a little bit more, I will be making a short version of this video in the coming week. That will have a lot less repetition, but will focus purely on the main subject. I've added chapters on the video so you can go back, rewatch, skip forward or whatever you wish. For those of you that follow the channel, this video was heavily delayed by some personal circumstances unfortunately. But as I've finally been able to wrap it up, I hope you enjoyed the video and please do let me know in the comments below what you think of it. Is it too much information? Is it too little information? Am I talking bullshit or am I right on the point? Let me know below. And if there's any tips that I've missed, make sure you mention them as well, as they will not only teach me something, but all the other people watching this video. So, share your thoughts, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And then let's get going. Hey there, welcome back to the channel. I'm DGW. First of all, on the Omaha map, the only game mode available is offensive. I've made an offensive tutorial before, so I will link to that in the description if you want to learn more about that game mode in itself. But in short, offensive game mode means that you as the attackers start on one side of the map and have 30 minutes per sector that you have to capture, totaling up to 5 sectors. Where offensive mostly differs from the normal game mode warfare is that only the stronghold itself is counting the bodies towards capping or defending. Also, once the attackers capture a certain sector or stronghold if you will during the match, it cannot be recapped by the defending team, which means in turn that there is no real reason to stick around in that stronghold, both for the defending team as well as the attacking team, except for maybe putting up some basics like nodes or trying to disrupt the attackers for a little while. The sector around the stronghold does not directly influence the cap or defend. Although when it comes to defending, denying access to that sector is probably the best way of keeping the attackers from the stronghold, and vice versa. If you are attacking, making sure that you have access from within that sector is probably the best and easiest way to capture a stronghold. No matter the game mode, each map consists of the same setup. There is 5 sectors which are either lined up from left to right or top to bottom, and each sector has 3 potential strongholds, of which the game chooses one at random per sector at the beginning of the match. Basically this means it will be quite rare for you to fight the same kind of battle over and over again, although you might be lucky or unlucky depending how you look upon that. Unlike most offensive matches, Omaha is probably the most challenging when it comes to capturing the first sector. Most other offensive maps do allow a bit of an easier way to capture that first sector, but landing on that beach is a real challenge. This basically means getting on the beach and capturing that first sector is all about making sure that you conceal your movements on the beach. The Germans have a big advantage of being on the cliffs and can pick off enemies with machine guns and any other kind of weaponry that they can. Getting towards that first sector therefore is all a matter of using as many smokes as whatever rule you choose can provide. When it comes to defending the beach, make sure that you get a garrison up inside the stronghold or just outside it as soon as you can. By doing this, your entire team has access to that stronghold if need be. Generally speaking, it will be very hard, perhaps even impossible to get any kind of defenses up, but if you were to choose to do so, I would suggest trying to build some kind of defenses around that garrison, so that first of all you've got somewhat of a safe place to spawn, and secondly it will be more difficult for the attackers to take that garrison out. Placing around some barbed wire to deny access to certain areas, or at least make that access as difficult as you can, is also a very good idea. The game provides the defenders with 3 garrisons in the second sector, allowing access to that second and the first sector. These garrisons cannot be taken out with any kind of explosives, but will have to be destroyed physically by walking up to them and holding F. Important to note for the defenders is that you are not limited by the normal 200 meters for building another garrison. You could pretty much literally build another garrison on top of it. A good strategy on defending an offensive map is to fortify 1 or maybe 2 sectors on the map. I would suggest building fortifications in sector 3 or 4, and perhaps if you can build fortifications in sector 5. You will need quite a few engineers and guys running supply trucks up and down, maybe a couple of support players in that area as well, to have as many supplies available and keep building out those fortifications. At the beginning of the match, command should choose which of the strongholds they wish to fortify and should get as many engineers to work as they can. Of course, do not forget to build your nodes, as they will be key in providing resources to the team. Now remember, once the attackers have captured a stronghold, you cannot recap it if you're the defending team. So move back towards the next point that has to be defended as soon as you can, because any delay in that could actually mean that point gets steamrolled before you get a decent chance to defend it. And the same applies to the attackers. As soon as you've captured a stronghold, there is not really a reason to linger there. Move onwards to the next point you have to attack as soon as you can, because you might actually beat the defenders to it. Let's start working our way through each stronghold, starting with dark green all the way up north. For any and all of these screenshots, please bear in mind that the exact positioning of the stronghold and garrisons is not absolute. While working through each of these, I've made sure to be as precise as I can, but there might be a few differences here and there. The attackers or allies in this matter will be coming in from the beach. Each and everybody starts with spawning on one of the boats, and then the trick is to try and get OPs up in somewhat safe positions as soon as you can. There is some sandbanks and outcrops that you can use for some form of cover, but half a decent defending team will not make that an easy feat. The defenders, or the Germans in this case, are provided with 3 garrisons in the second sector. Most of the influential ones are WN73 in the north and the middle one at WN71. Unlike the defending team, the attackers do not know which point is going to be next, so some of these tips might be a bit more difficult to achieve than others. Trying to establish a foothold on the beach is probably step 1 in attacking the stronghold. The best way to do that is to try and build a garrison at the bottom of the cliffs all the way in the north of the map. Do so by using a supply drop issued by the commander or 2 supply boxes from support players. The cliff will provide you a lot of cover when spawning in, but do not place it too far towards WN73, because if the Germans are spawning there, they will overrun that garrison. Remember, you are in enemy territory, and any enemy within 100 meters of that garrison will make it unusable. And do keep in mind you will need 100 supplies to build that garrison instead of 50. A similar attempt can be made towards the south, but that will be pretty difficult, as the Germans have a full view of what's happening there, and any of your squad leaders traveling to that position where you drop the supplies will be in constant fire for a long time before they reach the supplies in some form of cover. From this northern garrison, you can try and attempt to attack the garrison on WN73 and take it out. This will limit the defenders' access to that area and gives you another good flank towards dark green. Now do keep in mind, if WN73 happens to be the next point, which you as the attacker don't know, it might actually be really difficult to try and get that garrison out, because they will protect it with anything they can. A similar strategy can of course be attempted when it comes to WN71, but as said, traveling there from the northern sector will be pretty difficult. Once airheads are available, of course such can be attempted with an airhead by dropping that in I5 or I6. Placing OPs in a garrison in that area and then working your way up through WN71, taking out that garrison and then towards dark green. For the defenders, it is going to be important to keep those garrisons available or have backups in that area. Make sure you spot that flank before it actually becomes a nuisance and keep those flanks under control. In this and the next screenshot, the yellow lines are the outcrops providing you with some form of cover in which you can either bandage yourself or place your OPs. The light blue lines identify the potential paths you can take when attacking the stronghold. A good place also to put your OPs down when attacking is behind this bunker, as there is no direct view or line of fire towards that position. However, make sure you put that OP as far away from that bunker as you possibly can, because enemies inside will destroy it or make it impossible for you to actually build it. And this is where a little tip for the defenders comes in. If you happen to have a satchel, put it on the inside of that bunker. Make sure there's as little friendlies as possible inside that bunker, and you will blow up quite a number of attackers as well as their OPs. Let's move on to the middle sector, the draw. When it comes to attacking, flanking on this position is going to be pretty much impossible. The only way to really do so is by using an airhead all the way to the south or the north of the map and establishing a garrison over there. From those positions you can start working your way towards the draw, maybe taking out the garrisons at WN73 and WN70 in the process. But most of your time in the attacking sense will be spent on smoking the beach as much as you can, providing concealment and making it harder for the defenders to pick off your guys. If you are able to spawn in a tank or several tanks, make sure they keep an eye out on the top of the cliffs for enemy tanks as well as AT guns, and keep barraging that area with HE cells to try and take out as many enemies positioned there as you can. Use the outcrops lined out here in the screenshot for positioning your OPs and positioning your snipers and machine gunners there to provide as much cover as they can. When it comes to defending the draw, it is pretty much the same as defending the other two positions on the beach. Get those extra garrisons up as soon as you can, build some fortifications around those garrisons for safe spawning if there's any kind of possibility to do so, and make sure you keep an eye out for the attempted flanks from the attackers. Other than that, use the high ground to your advantage and start picking off the enemies as they try to approach the stronghold. On top of the cliffs there's quite a few clearings where you can position AT guns. These will be brutal in taking out both infantry and enemy tanks. Let's move further south towards Dark White. Attacking this is pretty much the same issue as attacking the draw. There's no real way to flank that area except for using an airhead either all the way to the south or perhaps somewhat to the north around the draw, or maybe a bit above that. If possible, increase your firepower by use of tanks to provide any form of cover, and do the same with the outcrops on the beach with snipers and machine gunners. And last but not least, use as many smokes as you can. And the same tips as the draw and dark green apply for defenders. Make sure you spot flanks before they happen and keep a constant stream of lead towards the beach. Position AT guns and possibly tanks on top of the cliffs to provide extra firepower. When it comes to the entire beach, if you are attacking, any use of bombing runs should be positioned somewhere along the top of the cliffs. This is where most of the enemies will be around, and therefore a bomber run or even strafing run on top of the cliffs will be most effective in taking out some of the firepower from the defenders. The defenders cannot use their arty to provide protection on the beach, and thus they too will need to rely on bombing runs and strafing runs if they really want to do a big impact. If the attackers happen to be successful in capturing the beach, the next row will be Sector 2. So let's start working our way through these strongholds, starting at the top with WN73. To attack WN73, there is a couple of possibilities. First of all, you can have that garrison up north that you might have already placed when attacking dark green. If not, get it up as soon as you can. And from there, try to establish a foothold in the north of the cliffs by use of the paths leading up the cliffs as well as the trenches on top of the cliffs. Secondly, you can try to attack from the village in the middle, get a garrison up probably on the beach in the former stronghold, and again work your way up the cliffs through one of the small roads. If possible, use either an airhead or a large flank around the enemy positions to get a garrison up behind the enemy point, so you have a flanking position from the back as well. For all strongholds, it is always important to have several flanks ongoing, as this will require the defenders to split their defensive efforts. When it comes to defending WN73, you should have had enough time to get at least one or two backup garrisons up. Get one behind WN73 and one to the north of WN73, which provide both the radar function, so you get alerted when enemies are near, as well as allow you access to those areas if the enemy starts to flank. If still available, you also have a garrison provided to you from the start of the battle in the middle at WN71. Keeping this or a replacement garrison available to the south of WN71 will make sure that you can try and keep a flank from the attackers coming in from the south under control. The second stronghold in the middle, or WN71, is pretty much the same story. When it comes to attacking, try and get flanks up to the north and possibly south, as defending this stronghold is a lot easier than defending WN71, at least in my opinion. There's more trenches and bunkers available on which to position machine gunners, and if the two extra garrisons the defenders were provided with at the start of the battle are still available, it will be very difficult to flank in any good way. When attacking, make sure you get at least one of these two garrisons out of commission so that you can establish a good flank. Many roads lead to WN71. There's a lot of little roads going up the cliffs, as well as possibilities to get flanks behind or to the north and south of the point. When defending this position, make sure you have backup garrisons, preferably one inside or close to the stronghold and one or two backup further behind. Again, these provide direct access to that area and also act as a radar in case the enemy tries to flank. Always keep your eyes open to the sky to see if the enemy is dropping any kind of airheads or supply drops, as this will give away their attempts of a flank before it actually happens. The last stronghold in Sector 2 is rinse and repeat of the previous. Personally, I find this more difficult to defend because the garrison provided at the start of the game is positioned outside the stronghold. Meaning that if you are defending it, the first thing you need to do is get a garrison up inside the stronghold in some form of cover. And again, make sure there is backup garrisons available to your flanks and behind. Attacking WN70 is pretty much the same story as WN71. Apart from trying to flank behind as well as from the north and the south, use the little roads leading up the cliffs as potential flanks. All you need is one or two positions to breach through, and this will force the defenders to split up their efforts. The village behind WN71 provides good placements for garrisons in attempting any kind of flank from behind. There's not much more to say about this second sector, so let's start moving on towards Sector 3, which in turn is one of the ones mostly used to fortify. Again, starting in the north with West Vierville. When attacking, there is a couple of good positionings for attacking garrisons. All the way up north there is a little crop of buildings that provide good cover, as well as to the south and behind the point, as seen in this screenshot. There is quite a few ways that provide some form of cover or at least good concealment in leading up to the stronghold. Apart from any form of fortifications, one of the most important things for the defenders is obviously to get garrisons up, both in the stronghold as well as some backups. And remember, as an extra backup garrison you can always position a half-track inside or just outside the stronghold, as it is not limited by the 200 meters separation. This half-track does not only function as a backup but also as a literal secondary spawn to allow access to a second part of the stronghold more rapidly without having to move around too much. Once you as the attackers start to come close to that stronghold, you will likely start to find a lot of fortifications, barbed wire closing off little entrances, and a lot of bunkers and barricades providing cover for machine gunners and other forms of infantry. Also, the buildings as well as the church provide good positioning for machine gunners. In this screenshot, the pink lines are where I would place any form of defenses that you can. Make sure you as a defenders keep having access to both of the courtyards, but block off the entrance for the attackers. When it comes to the dotted lines, this is where I would place barbed wire. Barbed wire makes it difficult, if not impossible, for enemy infantry to make it through, and any smaller gaps can be cordoned off with barricades and perhaps the occasional bunker. These barricades and bunkers will provide cover to any infantry you position there on lookout, and also will make it a lot harder to get through. Remember that if you're building anything in this game, supplies will need to be available within 50 meters, so when you're doing these supply drops either from the commander or supply trucks or even support players, make sure you spread them around so everybody building has them available. Some defenses can be upgraded, so we'll need additional supplies, and all in all you will need a lot of supplies to build up proper fortifications. These other screenshots provide you with ideas of positioning machine gunners and other forms of infantry, as well as where you can put either barbed wire or barricades. Let's move on to the middle of the sector at Vierville-sur-Mer, which is the battle over the church. When it comes to attacking this, there is a lot of ways that you can stay concealed until the last moment. There is plenty of buildings, walls and outcrops of vegetation that provide good concealment, and plenty of locations to put either a garrison or OPs. Unfortunately, when it comes to defending, I do have to repeat myself. Get garrisons up in various positions, both in the stronghold as well as back up to the north, south and behind. You know all this story about access to areas as well as radar functions. When it comes to fortifying this position, there is quite a few places where you can put down barbed wire and some barricades. There's only one really good position for a bunker, and that's to the south of the church, although you might choose to put another one to the north in the field. The church tower itself does not really provide a good vantage point, but the building in front of the church does have a couple of windows from which you can put machine gunners and other infantry. The church does, however, provide very good cover when it comes to bombing runs, so having a lot of guys inside that church could actually be a really good idea. Not much remains to be said about the church, so let's move on to the southern point, artillery battery. In most matches I've played on Omaha Beach, this is the one that they choose to fortify. But before moving into the details of this position, I do have to mention that the map itself seems to be slightly off. The trenches as well as the radar tower shown on the map is not where the stronghold and these landmarks actually are. Attacking artillery battery is a lot more difficult than attacking Vierville because the roads leading up to the stronghold are pretty much all without any form of cover. Before moving on, just a quick note, remember to build garrisons. If you come close to the stronghold, you might think there is a lot of positions that can provide the attackers with cover. However, most of the time the defenders will actually use these outcrops to build the fortifications on or besides. And this is exactly what I suggest you do when defending this point. Make use of the terrain as much as you can. First of all, I would make sure there is barbed wire along any broad openings, as well as barricades closing off some areas. Placing 2, maybe 3 bunkers in the open fields, or at least with views over these open fields, will provide you with the ability to cover these areas with machine gun fire. There is already some barbed wire in and around the stronghold, and I would suggest trying to close any gaps off with newly placed barbed wire. Let's move on to the 4th sector, and starting at the top again with rear battery. Rear battery is again a favorite for engineers to fortify. Also, the large set allows you to place your garrison in a secure position and perhaps even put a half track beside it to have a secondary spawn. When it comes to attacking rear battery, there is quite a few places where you can put garrisons in relatively covered areas. And as you can see on the screenshot, I've chosen to place these in and around buildings surrounding rear battery stronghold. As for travel, it is relatively well covered and concealed. You can get up really close to the stronghold without being spotted or shot at too soon. Most of the time the key to getting inside the stronghold on rear battery is trying to get behind the point, although getting a garrison up there is a bit difficult. And that is likely a position where the enemies, or the defenders I should say, have put their backup garrison, and the buildings are beside the main road leading up to rear battery, which would probably be the place where enemy vehicles will be approaching from. In other words, there is a pretty big chance this garrison will get overrun soon. There is a couple of other places where you could put one. I would put one in the top left corner of the sector, but even that could be complicated, as I personally would suggest putting a backup garrison if I'm defending the place. There is plenty of spots to put your OP, many of the bushes provide good cover and concealment for those OPs to be placed. The same goes for the hedge line north of the strong point, which also allows some concealment and cover in placing any OPs. To push through well placed fortifications, your only real option is to use satchel charges, meaning that you'll have to get those guys carrying those satchels close to the point to be able to position them right, and this means you will need to give them smoke and cover fire. I know from experience this can be really difficult and you tend to die a lot more times than you actually place satchels. But a well placed satchel can take out a large chunk of the defenses built on a stronghold like this, and perhaps even the garrison as well as several OPs. One of the ways I've been quite successful in placing satchels is to wait until a bombing run actually hits the point and then place my satchel directly after that bombing run. The bombing run will not damage or take out these defenses, but most of the infantry in that area will be gone, and it will give you a little window to actually get close. When building your fortifications on this stronghold, my first suggestion is to make sure all 3 entrances to the large shed are covered by at least a barricade. I wouldn't fully build it to allow quick access for your own guys, but I would put a tier 1 or tier 2. These will allow you to keep your garrison as well as your half-track as safe as you can. Next up, there is a couple of places where you could put a bunker. I would put one close to the main road in the large opening inside the stronghold, as well as a bunker behind somewhere, and perhaps one in the southern part of the stronghold facing the open field. By doing so, you cover large areas with just 3 bunkers. There's also a couple of openings in this stronghold that are not covered by the existing walls, so I'd place either barbed wire and or barricades in those. Combining barbed wire with a barricade behind it so you can sit in safety while shooting through that barbed wire is probably a good option, as this will prevent the enemies, the attackers in this case, from getting close. Please note that in the southwestern corner of the stronghold there is a possibility to actually go through the foliage, so you will have to make sure that part is covered as well, probably by barbed wire, but maybe you'll be able to place a barricade as well. But always note that a barricade will not prevent enemies from coming through, it will only give you a covered position to shoot from. The middle stronghold in Sector 4 is Church Road, and this again is a position that can be heavily fortified. Close to the stronghold there is a lot of ways to get to it, with cover and concealment from the map itself, but this only applies to the north of the sector, as the southern side of the sector is pretty much open fields only. The main building inside the stronghold has a pretty good view of the southern part of the stronghold, and as such can keep that safe with a couple of machine gunners and other forms of infantry. When it comes to placing defensive garrisons, I would suggest putting a garrison in one of the compounds and then a half-track in the other compound. This allows you to have several spawn options, and one single bombing run will probably not take it out. Many of the existing walls can be vaulted over, and there is a couple of openings in the foliage, so there is plenty of access points when attacking. Remember this, when you're defending the point, there is a lot of little openings that the enemy can come through. So keeping a bunker or 2 inside the stronghold, as well as a good eye on those openings, will help you defend the point. When defending the stronghold, remember that some of the buildings allow you to shoot from the windows, so use that in your advantage to cover larger sections of the battlefield. Position a bunker inside both of the compounds, as well as one in the north of the stronghold, to provide good cover fire from there. And of course, when attacking this position, the best friend is gonna be your satchel. Try to destroy any fortifications by use of that. The southern stronghold in the 4th sector is Orchards. Now Orchards is mainly an open field covered by several hedgerows as well as trees and buildings. The attackers can get really close to the stronghold, but actually getting in if you fortify it well can be very difficult. There is plenty of openings that they can push through, as seen as the screenshot, but if you place your fortifications well, it will be really hard to get in. There is no cover inside the stronghold for a garrison, so I would suggest to build a first tier bunker, then put a garrison inside that and then fully build the bunker. This will keep it safe from bombing runs as well as rockets and tank shells. I've also often seen a garrison built close to the eastern wall, but I would suggest not doing that, as the attackers can put a satchel on the other side of that wall and take out fortifications as well as your garrison if it is too close. It's hard to kind of tell you exactly where to position your fortifications, but as this is a pretty much open field, there's not a lot limiting what you can use. You can let your imagination go wild and use barbed wire to keep enemies at bay, and then put barricades and bunkers inside the stronghold to position your gunners. The field to the north as well as the orchard to the south of the stronghold offer good ways of trying to get close to the point. There's a lot of concealment from the trees as well as the wheat field, but only in the eastern part is the attack covered by the existing structures. The wall in the east of the stronghold cannot be vaulted over, but in the northern section of that there is an opening that you can push through. All in all, not the hardest point to attack or defend for that matter, but defending this with any effectiveness will need a lot of fortifications built. Let's move on to Sector 5, and in the north you get Beaumont Road. First of all, in attacking this position there is a lot of ways to get close to the stronghold in concealment, even if your garrisons are further away. To the northeast there is a large open field, as well to the southeast, but there is plenty of hedgerows in between these to get to the stronghold safely. The stronghold itself is pretty small and allows quite a few fortifications to be built, especially use of barbed wire and barricades. When it comes to placing bunkers, I would suggest having one in the northeast, the south as well as the west. These 3 bunkers again will allow you a lot of cover fire. Also, the main buildings allow good positioning for machine gunners and other forms of gunners, but they mostly overlook the southern fields as well as the stronghold itself, and there is no real cover towards the west or the east. Except for the broken attic of the main building, which does look east over the road, but there's not a lot of other areas this can cover. In the middle of Sector 5 we find Crossroads. Now personally I don't think Crossroads would be a good position to fortify, as the stronghold is pretty weirdly placed. Had this stronghold covered the large compound just to the east of it, it would have made a lot more sense and it would be really good to fortify. But there is a lot of little structures inside the stronghold that prevent you from putting any decent fortifications up, like barbed wire or barricades, let alone bunkers. There is however not a lot of cover or concealment to attack Crossroads. It is pretty much surrounded by open fields with only a few lines of trees and hedgerows. The buildings in the compound do allow you to cover some areas from a slightly elevated position, but these are definitely not ideal. And as you can see in this screenshot, the stronghold of Crossroads is pretty much completely out in the open, and only the northeastern part of it is covered by buildings. This means you will have to put a lot of effort in fortifying this, much more so than most of the other strongholds. Now I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm just saying it's gonna be a lot of work, which means your team will need to buy you as much time as it can. The last stronghold on Omaha is in Sector 5 in the south, and I've got no idea how to pronounce this properly, so if I butcher it, forgive me for that, but I think it's called Les Îles or something like that. The stronghold itself is pretty small and covers 2 little compounds. Again, a garrison and a half-track should be placed in either of these, so you've got spawn options in both. Even though it looks like it is surrounded by open fields, there is actually quite some cover to get close through the orchard to the southeast of it, as well as the wheat fields to the south. When it comes to the north, there's a couple of buildings that can conceal your movements in getting close to the stronghold. This stronghold can be fortified really well, as the buildings and walls allow you to position barbed wire and barricades really well, and perhaps a bunker or 2 would really help in covering the open fields surrounding it. Several of the buildings inside the stronghold also allow you to position gunners. Now when building your fortifications, please note that there is no real direct access in between the 2 compounds. The only way to go is from the west to the east and vault over that wall, however there is not really a way back. So I would suggest leaving some opening in one of the gates and use barbed wire to keep the attackers at bay. You can either choose to only fortify the compounds itself, or choose to incorporate part of the road in the south of the stronghold, but that really comes down to how much time you have. When fortifications are placed well, my experience is that it is pretty much impossible to capture the stronghold, so getting there as soon as you can is obviously your best strategy. Before closing off this video, I do want to go through some of the key points again, just to reiterate those and make them absolutely clear. First up, some of the basics. Capping in an offensive map only takes 1 minute, and only the stronghold counts, so the surrounding sector does not influence the actual cap. Best strategy to attack any kind of stronghold is to make sure you do so from several sides. Only one side needs to breach through, and then the defenders have no choice but to divert their actions. This in turn means it is very important that the defenders keep an eye out for flanks before they happen. Keep an eye out for any kind of airheads, supply drops and supply trucks trying to flank around you, and make sure somebody deals with them before they actually get established. As defenders, you will likely choose to fortify 1, 2 or maybe even 3 strongholds depending on how much time you have. Make sure you prioritize these correctly. 3 engineers will first need to build you some nodes so you have the maximum amount of resources available at all times. Spawn in as many supply trucks as you can and have guys running them back and forward all the time. Perhaps use support players to do so, because they can also drop another crate of 50 supplies. Place a garrison as well as a half-track inside the stronghold you wish to fortify, and then start putting some backup garrisons around it. Once an engineer has depleted his abilities to build stuff, he can switch roles with somebody else, perhaps one of the support players, so that you have a fresh engineer that can build a full set of defenses. For the defenders, it is also important to allow your engineers as much time as they can to build up these defenses. This literally means keeping the attackers at bay at the first and second sector as long as you can. In theory, you could give your engineers about an hour to build up the defenses in the third sector, about an hour and a half in the fourth sector, and obviously 2 hours then in the fifth sector. And this makes me have to remark again that if you lose a certain sector, do not linger in it for too long. There's no way for you to recap it once you lost it, so get back to the next point you have to defend as soon as you can to prevent the attackers from steamrolling you. And for the attackers, essentially the same thing applies. The sooner you get a move on towards the next point you have to attack, the more chance you actually have of steamrolling the enemy, or at least get a good foothold in that sector. I think I've pretty much covered anything that I had to say about Omaha Beach, although even now, listening to what I've told you, there is 20 more things that I could. But I don't want this video to end up being 3 hours long, so let's just stick with this for now. I really look forward to your reactions on this video. Would this be a good setup for future map tutorial videos, or would I have to go back to the drawing board and think of something new? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below and any tips and tricks that I might have missed on Omaha or Hella Loose in general. Last thing that remains is to first of all thank you for watching. Make sure you check out my tutorial playlist or random gameplay playlist. Leave a like on the video if you think it deserves it, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on anything Hella Loose. And I will see you in the next one.